And today's broadcast is brought to you by Eclectic Horseman Magazine. Stay tuned for Eclectic Conversations hosted by Emily Gitchie.
All right. Well, thanks for joining me today. I'm here with Mark Rashid to visit about his latest book, For the Love of the Horse, Looking Back, Looking Forward. How are you today, Mark?
I'm doing awesome, Emily. Thank you. Appreciate you
Awesome.
having me come on.
Awesome. Well, I'm super excited to visit about this book because there is just so much in here, and I think the best place to start is probably at the beginning. You start off by talking about your first book, Considering the Horse. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that process, because it sort of sets the groundwork for where the book goes.
Yeah, the book came. Considering the Horse came out in '93, so it was the 30th year anniversary, and it was. It's a funny thing because the we have two books, my first two books, downstairs near the guest room, and they're framed. They're both in one frame, and I was walking past it one day, and you walk past something like that every day, day in and day out, and it doesn't even register almost anymore. And just one day it registered that those books were there, and it was like, man, that was a long time ago, because what really triggered it was me looking at the frame, because the frame that the books are in was done by a friend of mine years and years ago, and I was thinking, God, because he passed away a while ago. So I was trying to do the math in my head, and turns out we were coming up on the 30th year anniversary, and I've kind of stopped writing books and then turned my attention to other things, writing movie scripts and stuff like that, and and so it was like, gosh, I mean, that was such an important book for me. It completely changed the trajectory of my life, and where I went and what I did, and everything. And I thought, God, it would be. I feel like I needed to honor that book in some way, and so I wanted to write a book about maybe where I am today and how that book has helped me get to where I am. And so that's kind of how that came about. And so the first kind of chapter of the book is how that process, how the book got started, and I was actually asked to write the book, kind of in a roundabout way. And I didn't know anything about writing books, and so it was just a shot in the dark. And it's a kind of a long involved story that's in the book, but it ended up being a book, and getting published. And it was such a weird thing. I mean, I thanked everybody I could think of in the book. I had a whole page of thank yous to everybody, because I figured I'm never going to write another book ever. Nobody's ever going to read this. Um, and I remember my editor asking me, how I wanted the book to read and how I wanted it to look. And I said I wanted it to look like a Will James book from back in the 1930s, 100 years ago, 1930s. And I wanted it to read like a James Herriot book, because James Herriot was my favorite author at the time. And so that's what happened. And again, in the book, I talk about how it almost didn't get published because the marketing guy looked at it, read it, and it wasn't done at that point. And he said, yeah, I'm never going to be able to sell this thing, because the best-selling books on the market at the time were how-to books, and this was not that. And so they didn't market it, really. He didn't know how to market it. He sent it out to a couple of magazines to get reviews, and the first printing, I think, was only a couple thousand books that they thought were just going to sit on their shelves forever.
Yeah.
And the very first review that we got was from Equus magazine that said, that I was a Colorado clone of James Herriot, and the book took off.
Yeah.
And so far now it's sold, I think, over 1.5 million copies worldwide. So yeah, who knew? I mean,
Yeah.
it was just unbelievable.
Well, and I love how when you're taking us through that process, as it's being written, I mean, there were moments there where you were having pressure to not to have the title be consider the horse and the how-to issue and other, little pieces. And I loved that you stayed true to what you wanted to say and how you wanted to say it. Because that's for a first time author, that's incredible that you did that.
Well, I didn't know. I mean, I didn't know you couldn't do that, and or shouldn't do it. And my editor, who was the guy who talked me into writing it to begin with, was extremely supportive. And if I could explain to him why I wanted it to say something, I wanted it to say a certain thing a certain way, and I could explain it to him and it made sense to him, he would back me up on it. And so a lot of it was from help from him. His name was Scott Roederer, and he just lives up the road from me here. And but he really helped. And the considering the horse, I felt like the publisher wanted to say consider the horse, and for me, I I mean the whole book is, I'm not trying to tell anybody to do anything, and I felt like consider the horse was me telling somebody what they needed to do, and I just didn't feel right about that. It didn't feel good to me. And so, I kept, I really wanted considering, because it was that just those 3 letters, just it made such a big difference. It's a suggestion, that something that we can do instead of something you should do. So yeah, I appreciate you saying so. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, so then after the stage is sort of set there, you take us sort of back with some memories of your early horse life and sharing some of those memories of your mentor Walter
Mhm.
and lessons that you learned from him. One of the ones that just really resonated with me was when you're talking about the horse that chews on things, and that just and I have it marked. Well, I absolutely love that you talk about not looking at the underlying cause of an issue and trying to fix a problem without understanding where it's coming from. You're just at a point in your life where you're not even going to do that. And I think that's just it's sort of next level of well, and that's sort of something I want to visit about too. So talk a little bit about that that part of the book where you're visiting about learning that lesson.
Well, yeah, Walter was, um, he was an amazing guy, and it's only in retrospect now that I can look back and see just how impactful that whole thing was on my life back then. I'm a kid, and I'm just kind of going through, and I don't know what's going on, and I hadn't been around horses, and I didn't know, so it was all new to me. And but the thing that you're talking about was when we had a horse that would chew on things. We had several over the time that I was there, and I would always take, it would bother me because he would chew up ropes and chew up reins, and I never gave the horse time to actually do the chewing. They would chew, and then I would get it out of their mouth. And the thing that he would say was that, just let them chew it. They'll chew on it, and then they're going to spit it out, and then they'll be done with it. And sure enough, that's what would happen. And I would say, well, yeah, but he's chewing up the rope. And he said, we got a lot of rope. He's chewing up the reins. Yeah, we got a lot of those too. So it was for, looking back now, how it just didn't matter for him, it was like, watch what happens when you just let it happen. Watch, and then see. That wasn't, he didn't say those words, but that's what he was saying. And now, years and years later, we come to find that that horses that are doing that have high levels. Research now shows that older horses that chew on things and chew on ropes or grab your jacket and that kind of thing, providing that it wasn't taught to them, the grabbing jackets, by hand feeding or something like that, actually has to do with higher levels of cortisol in their system, and they're chewing in order for them to be able to downregulate the cortisol in their system. So they're actually trying to fix themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens is we try to take those ropes out of their mouths while they're trying to fix themselves, and now they just want to do it more, and they want to do it more because they're trying to fix it. But if you just let them do it, they fix themselves, they quiet down, and now we can move on to the next thing. So, and that's just, my work with Dr. Steve Peters. And that was one of those things where, again, it's in the book, but I had gotten to a point where several things had happened. And so I wrote to Steve and asked him about it. And normally he'll get back to me almost right away on stuff like that. It took him a day or two because he had to do some research and found it. And so I was like, okay, I get it. And even, 100 years ago, Walter was right about that too. So, yeah.
Well, and I love where you're talking about, sort of the sharing of information back and forth with you and Dr. Peters. And I think it's a great, like the evidence-based horsemanship book and the video is an incredible resource. And I think the more that we can get people talking about it in, not scientific language, but more talking. I'm going to just babble here for a minute, but because I helped Martin and Dr. Peters on the video, and some of that language and some of those concepts are so cerebral, and the language is intimidating. And so I love when you're sharing in this book about your interaction with that information. It just makes it more accessible for a non-scientific person to not feel intimidated by the science. Because there's a lot of people that sort of push back a little bit on that. So maybe you could share a little bit about more about because I see that you guys are doing clinics together. So there's like some relationship and sharing of information there. Just a little bit off topic, but maybe talk a little bit about your work together with him.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny how things like this work. In one of my books I was talking about, I actually did a chapter on the concept of respect and disrespect, and how horses don't understand those concepts. It's an abstract concept that their brain they don't have the brain power to be able to understand those types of things. And out of the blue, I got an email from Dr. Peters and saying that everything that I said was right on the money. And, kind of one thing led to another, and we became really good, close friends, and we collaborate a lot. And one of the things, it has to be simple for me to be able to, I'm not very good with big words. I mean, if I say them enough, I can maybe start to put it together. But so a lot of the words that Steve was using just kind of went over my head, and because I just didn't have any concept of what they meant. Now that I've heard him enough and and we've worked together enough, I get it. But I get it. So it's pretty daunting. And so for me, plus I'm not a neuroscientist, so how can I say these things in a way that has to make sense to me? because if it can make sense to me, then I feel like it can maybe make sense to some other folks without using the big words, saying basically the same thing, but just saying it, maybe putting it in a little softer language so that it's a little more accessible. Not that Steve's stuff isn't accessible, but for some people it can be intimidating, and then you get turned off. I don't want to. That's a big word, and I don't know what it means, so I'm just going to go back to what I was doing. So, but if we can make it a little bit more accessible, I mean, everything that even in all my books, I try to write in such a way to where people can understand it, that it makes sense, and then you can do with the information what you want, but I want it to be, even when I'm writing, I have people that now, we've got friends all over the world now just because of our schedule and our travel and that kind of thing. And so when I'm writing, I will actually stop. If I'm trying to say something important, I'll stop and I'll ask myself, okay, so how would so-and-so in Switzerland, how would this land with them? Or how would this land with somebody in the UK or Australia or whatever, or even on the East Coast or wherever, and how can I say it in such a way to where hopefully it can blanket as many people as I can to get the point across that I'm trying to make. So
well, and you do an incredible job. I mean, you touch on a lot of sort of challenging topics, but your style of writing is so conversational. It just feels like you're sitting here having a visit, and it's just it's not it doesn't, it's super accessible for the person reading it, which I really enjoyed. So one of the phrases that I wrote down as I was taking notes was you were talking about encountering the one size fits all expatriates. And I loved that phrase of people who were coming to your clinics who had gone through a program that was a one size fits all approach. And I'm sort of curious about, like, I feel like that's such a common path for people to find something and mimic it and feel like it's the only way, the only answer. And then there comes a point where they either stay there or they look around and start to see what else is out there. And then another part in that I underlined was where you were talking about people teach like they're taught. So your approach not being sort of a one size fits all is directly from your having a mentor that was not that way. I'm not sure what question I'm trying to ask here, Mark, but okay. I'm really interested in what you see in your students. Like, do you feel like that's sort of a normal progression where people sort of start with mimicry and then they start to develop their own feel and their own horsemanship? Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
That's a really good question. And I think that I think everybody starts out with mimicry. I think that that's because it's the first thing that we do is we imitate. I mean, from the time where we hit the ground until, when we're learning something new, we sort of have to mimic it first. And just to kind of get a feel for it, if you will. And then you start digging a little deeper, or not. But it's the learning, you start with the mimicking because it's the imitation, because it's all you have. I want to do this thing, and so I see this person doing this thing, so I'm going to do that thing the way that person did that thing. And that a lot of times will get you some success. it just won't get you success all the time. And if we care about what we're doing, those times when it doesn't get us the success are going to start us on a different path. You know, we're going to start asking questions. Why didn't that work? You know, what did I do there? What did the horse do? What happened there? Why didn't that work? And asking those questions is what starts moving us forward. The sort of one size fits all paradigm doesn't allow much for that. It's and over time, folks will either abandon the horse that they aren't able to get along with, or and then get another horse that will maybe put up with the stuff that they're doing until they don't get along anymore, and then they'll abandon that horse and move on to the next one, and so forth. So instead of them helping themselves and getting better, they just do the same things over and over and over with different horses, for instance. We've run into a lot of folks that have done that to the point where they just finally went, okay, this isn't working. This is now my third horse or whatever. And that's 3 horses and they all turned out the same. I'm doing the same thing. The horses are turning out the same. It's not what I'm looking for. I need to look outside of the box here. And so, you know, and that's a good thing. You know, that's what helps us. That's what gets us moving. It motivates us forward. And that's where innovation comes from, you know, if we're lucky. And it moves the needle, you know. And I just feel like we should be, not overtly necessarily, but we should, if we're in this world, we should be trying to find ways to help move the needle in a positive way. You know, that's how I feel about pretty much everything, but a pet, particularly horses, you know. And you know, people like Dr. Peters, you know, he's moving the needle in a positive way, you know, and so that's the kind of thing that if we pay attention, we can be part of, you know, all of us. Even in our own backyard, we can be part of that and moving things forward. So,
one of the other analogies that really, or illustrations that really resonated with me was you're talking about people wanting to have a relationship with a horse, but the reality of it being pretty one-sided, and where you talk about the flow, like thinking about it like the flow of electricity, where there's, you know, feedback coming back and forth. And I think it is so, you know, we work on ourselves, but we're maybe not aware of that, of always feeling the feeling from our horse, even though we're trying to do better for them.
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic because, you know, over the years, things have shifted a lot from, you know, from basically us demanding things of our horses, for instance, getting them because horses are going to do it, you know, they're pretty pliable that way. But it's, you know, you're not going to, but that the feel of the two of you doing it together isn't there. And so there's friction. You know, it's like sandpaper, you know, it's like, yeah, I can move this thing across this board, but it drags a little bit. You know, you get that feeling where there's no flow to it, you know, it's going, but it's like pushing a rope up a hill. And so that the biggest part of it, for me anyway, is being able to feel back And I'm not talking about the physical feeling back. It's the feeling, what's happening internally, between us and our horses. And a lot of times folks will talk about connection, wanting to connect to their horses. And we're not that good at it. We're not that good at connecting. I mean, we can do it, but we're just, we're not that good at connecting to ourselves, really, in a lot of cases. And so, but horses, that's factory installed equipment, and they're always trying to connect, to their surroundings and to other horses, and and it's kind of what they do. And with us, it's like we're trying to do that without really knowing where we're going with it, and so we don't even know what it's supposed to feel like or what it's supposed to look like, or we just want a connection. And what does that mean? Well, I want to, I want to, I want to feel good about my horse, and I want my horse to feel good about me. All right. But what does that mean? What does it look like? What does it feel like? That's the answer. That's the part that folks struggle with answering, I think, a lot of times. And it's because we don't know what it feels like in us to be connected to ourselves a lot of times. And so that two-way street thing, sometimes it's about allowing things to happen rather than pushing on things to try and get them to happen. When we're talking about folks trying to connect to their horses, yeah, that's great, except the things I'm doing are making my horse miserable. Because I want my horse to be able to go over this jump, or I want my horse to do this sliding stop, or I want and what it takes to get them there in the short term isn't very comfortable for them. So they're not going to maybe like seeing us come around that often. And, but I want to have this connection and this bond with this horse, and I'm making them miserable, and so it's going to be hard for them to be able to go, yeah, this is awesome, let's go do this thing. That's, I would much rather do that with you, this thing that I really don't like because of the way you're presenting it, than be over here with my buddies out on the grass. So, I think sometimes there's a little bit of a disconnect between what we want and how we are going about trying to obtain that. And we aren't paying attention to what that horse is actually going through, and and that slows the process down considerably. If we're talking about connection,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
If we just allow them the opportunity to connect with us, it's all good after that. It's like what we try to do is it's like we're trying to get somebody to make somebody love us. I don't know if anybody's ever tried to do that, but it very seldom ever works out. you know
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
But allowing things, a connection can be, if we allow the horse to connect, it makes it so much easier
Mm-hmm.
than us trying to push that on them. So
so you talk some in here about your experience with martial arts. I don't want to use the wrong term. But does that would you say that was something that facilitated your ability to connect to yourself and more with the horses?
I would say that had a big impact. Yeah. I've been training now for almost 35 years, in a number of different arts, but primarily Aikido. And yeah, that has had a big impact on me, more so than anything else, really. I get asked a lot about, other horsemen that I watch or that I admire and that kind of thing. And and I don't have a lot of those folks for a variety of reasons. I struggle a little bit sometimes when what folks are saying and what they're doing don't match up. I worry. I um, so it doesn't feel true to me in those cases, and so I was looking for something. The way that I got into martial arts, really, I was looking for something that had the feeling of the way things felt when I was a kid.
Mhm.
With Walter, his place had a certain feel. The things he did had a certain feel. I'm not just the things he did, but the atmosphere where he, the way he worked, the way he did things, the way he spoke, the way he moved, um, and how that permeated the whole um, everything in his place. It had a certain feel, and even in the book I talk about the imitation part at first when I was trying to work up on my own, and what I was trying to imitate was the feel, but I didn't know what I was looking for. And so when I started looking at different horsemen, it didn't have the same feel, and I knew it existed. I knew it existed, but it didn't have that feel that, it's, it just didn't have that.
Mhm.
And, uh, and it was more ego based, I felt, in many cases, than it was, really in it for the horse. And I'm not speaking badly. I don't. None of that matters to me.
Yeah.
But that's how it felt to me.
Mhm.
And um, so I was looking for something that had the feel that I was looking for, and I found that in with my first Aikido instructor in the dojo, and that dojo had the same feel, the way that he taught, the way he moved, everything. We're still really good friends to this day. Um, uh, and that it was there. And almost every dojo, Aikido dojo that I've been in, almost not all of them, but almost everyone, and I've been in a fair few by now, but has the same feel. And so that was it for me. Okay, now how do we? So there's the feel. Now how do we develop that?
Mhm.
And so then that's when the training comes in. And here's how. These are the things that you're looking for. Here's what's already in you that you can bring to your partner. These are things that you didn't even know existed that are there. And so that was a big part of of my development, and the direction I wanted to go.
Mhm.
The thing I was looking for, I couldn't find in the horse world. I had found it somewhere else, and then now I can bring it back to my work with
Mhm.
horses.
And do you feel like that, like incongruity, that are discomfort with the incongruity of saying one thing and doing another? Do you feel like when your students, do you feel like that resonates with your students as well when they come to you? Is that, do they find you and sort of feel that same feeling like, ah, finally I can, it's all of a piece?
I get we'd probably have to ask them. I don't know.
Okay. Okay.
You know, for me, it's about being as honest as you can be. You know, um, and when I say honest as you can be, for me, it means I'm being honest with you right now with the information I have. And tomorrow I might have different information. And then I will be honest with that information.
Mhm.
And the next day, so
Mhm.
this is the best I can do right now with what I have. And I'm going to offer that to you. And and with the caveat that I'm hopefully going to be better. And so, if you come and see me in a year from now, we may do this differently. And and if so, it's because we found a way to do this in a way that is is more beneficial, for the horse. And so I that's what I try to be, as honest as I can. And really, when I'm working with my students, the folks that come to us, is I want to treat them the way that I would like to be treated. And I want to be as fair as I can and as positive as I can. And, and keep the ball moving. And let's, if this is where you are and you don't want to be there anymore, how do we help you get from where you are right now to where you heading in the direction you want to go?
Mm-hmm.
And we do the same thing with horses. This is where we are, and we don't want to be here, so let's see if we can find a way to get them somewhere else.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
And really it's about just trying to get along, and through communication
Mm-hmm.
as best we can, with the understanding that hopefully we're going to be better.
Yeah.
Which is the goal.
Yeah. Well, is there a part of the book that you would like to share with us today? I always ask my authors to read a little bit in their own voice, a passage or two from the book. Is there something that you could share with us today?
Yes. Good answer. We were talking just before we went on here that it's not my favorite thing to do is reading in front of people. You would think I'd be better at it, having written a couple of books, but I'm just not. But I'm going to give it a shot.
Okay.
I'm willing to do that. And this is just I'm going to have to put some seeing eyeglasses on here so I can see what I'm doing. Yeah, so I'm going to, because we were just talking about this, which is really interesting. This is the passage that I picked out when you mentioned yesterday that I might have to do this. So, yeah. So this is what I picked out, and it's funny because we were just kind of talking about all this. So several years ago, I experienced what I felt was a major breakthrough in my horsemanship. The interesting thing was I wasn't anywhere near a horse when it happened. I was invited to dinner after Aikido class one evening by Aikido sensei. It was a great honor to have been invited, and even though it was already after 9 at night and I still had nearly an hour to drive to get home, I gratefully accepted. 3 of us, sensei, another student who has also been invited, and I drove to a nearby restaurant where we sat down at a table and ordered our meals. We engaged in small talk for a few minutes before sensei asked what I did for a living. I work with horses, I told him. It's why I began studying Aikido. I wanted to find something to help me improve my work. He smiled, folded his arms across his chest, leaned back in his chair. Has it? It was clear by the expression on his face that he already knew the answer. It has, I smiled. Very much. He nodded. He then asked what the similarities were between horsemanship and Aikido. And for the next few minutes, I shared with him and the other student at the table what I found so far. I also told him my ultimate goal with horses was to find ways to communicate with them on the same level they communicate with one another, a level so subtle it is often difficult, if not impossible, to see. I know nothing of horse, Sensei said, placing his hand flat on the table between us. But maybe this is how they do. He asked me to place my hand on his and then push down so that he would be unable to lift his hand from the table. I did. He tried to lift his hand, but I was holding it down with as much pressure and energy as I could, and his hand wouldn't budge. For example, this is how we do, he said, motioning for me to continue holding his hand down. We fight, go against partner. Then, without warning, I felt my body begin to change. The change, an uncontrollable relaxation of all my tense muscles, began in the hand that I was using to hold his hand to the table. It very quickly passed all the way through me, all the way to my feet. Then, from somewhere deep inside him, what I can only describe as a slow wave began to build. He smiled again. This how they do? It was more of a question than a statement. Unity first, then go together. His hand, with mine on top, and me trying in vain to keep his from moving, lifted effortlessly from the table. Change inside by change outside by change inside first. He took his hand from the table, crossed his arms over his chest, and leaned back in his chair again. In Aikido, unity difficult to see. Feel for unity inside self and partner. Make more easy. The idea of developing a change in ourselves from the inside in order to help change or soften a partner in Aikido was not new to me. In fact, the class Sensei just finished teaching, as well as a number of the classes he taught in which I attended, was entirely on the internal elements of Aikido. I even found a great deal of success using the same principles when dealing with difficult horses since I began studying with him. However, he said something this time that really caught my attention. He said unity was difficult to see, but if one feels for unity in both oneself and one's partner, it can make it easier. Was he saying that the internal unity could actually be seen? If so, would that be the key to being able to somehow physically see the kind of subtle communication horses offer each other, the kind of communication that seems invisible to us? As I continued to attend Sensei's classes, I tried to pay very close attention, even closer than I'd been, to what he offered his partners. And if I could see kind of minute visible change in them prior to him making contact with them. I found there were times when a change was visible, but to be honest, no more than I would normally see in a similar situation. Then, during one class, I saw it. Well, actually, I think we all saw it. In fact, a blind man could have seen it. Since I asked a student to be his partner during a demonstration, the partner was to take a hold of Sensei's wrist so Sensei could demonstrate unity through contact, and that's when it happened. Just as the partner, Uke, went to reach for Sensei's wrist in a very powerful way, a little smile crossed Sensei's face. As the smile appeared, and before the two made contact, there was an ever so slight dissipation of Uke's intensity. A quiet but unified ooh rippled through all of us watching. Then, upon actually making contact with Sensei's wrist, the student collapsed uncontrollably to the mat. Unity inside first, then inside partner, Sensei said. See unity? We all nodded, having witnessed the obvious connection between the two before contact was made. Sensei motioned for Uke to try again. The student again reached for Sensei's wrist in a powerful way. Sensei again smiled, but Uke didn't seem to lose any intensity in his reach. Still, when he made contact, Uke again crumpled to the mat. Sensei turned to us, still smiling. See unity? We all sat quietly, none of us having actually seen the point of relaxation in Uke that we saw previously. In Aikido, unity difficult to see. Feel for unity in self and partner. Make more easy. It was then that the point I believe he was trying to make struck me. We have a tendency to look for outside physical changes, but seldom look for changes on the inside. Yet it is the internal changes that lead to the external changes in both us and our partners. It's very much the same in horsemanship. We are taught to watch or feel for external changes in the horses we work with, but pay little attention to the internal changes. Even when we do look for internal changes in the horse, we often are paying little attention to what is going on inside us. I continue to attend as many of Sensei's classes in the internal elements of Aikido as possible, and, not surprisingly, I found that the concepts I've learned from him can be directly applied to horses in almost any situation. I've also been able to improve my own internal awareness, which is in no way at the level in which Sensei operates, but still light years better than it was before I began studying with him. One of the things I also noticed in my own internal awareness began to improve is that my ability to see and feel internal changes in the horses has not only improved, but it has gotten more accurate as well. Whereas in the past, I might have waited for some tiny external change to occur before I would pick up on what the horse might be thinking or feeling. Now I could sort of feel what was going to happen before the external change in the horse would actually show up. These changes in awareness translated directly into the level of softness or feel that my body was able to produce and replicate. So much so, in fact, that just 5 years ago, I was completely unaware that such a level of softness even existed in me or in the horses. This change was like suddenly being able to see in 3 dimensions after a lifetime of only being able to see in 2. Of course, when any major shift in skill or understanding of concepts begins to take hold, the mind and body have a period of adjustment or recalibration, if you will. It's a part of growth that can be pretty uncomfortable at times. And it was no different for me, as I tried to navigate between what I had always known and done and this new understanding. I found myself floundering a bit, making mistakes I didn't usually make, struggle with my feel and timing, and even questioning the direction I was going. It was very unsettling, to say the least. But as time went on, I decided just to accept what was going on instead of fighting or worrying about it. And soon after, things began to smooth out. Eventually, the fog of uncertainty lifted, as it always does, and the path became clearer and a bit easier to navigate. Now, several years later, I found this new direction not only very exciting, but also endless in its possibilities. 5 years ago, I could not have imagined the level of softness that would be available to me today. Today, I can't imagine what will be available in years to come. But one thing is certain, I'm sure looking forward to the journey.
Thank you. Thank you for reading that. I loved that passage. And there's so much to think about in there.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, that was like I said, I mean, Aikido in general has been a big help for me, and not the least of which there are my instructors, and Aikido Sensei was a big part of that, as well as Shion Adams, who was my initial instructor, and his instructor before him, and his instructor before him. You know, I've had the opportunity to work with all these great masters, and so it's been it's really helped me a lot. Yeah.
When I read that part in the book, I was like, I want to know what it felt like with his hand under your hand. Like, I mean, I'm like, because it's that that wanting to feel something you've never felt before, and I just like, I couldn't even think what that must have, you know, what that felt like.
Well, I think you will very
Yeah.
soon.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward
Yeah.
to it. Well, and I so again and again in the book, I appreciate how I mean, by you talking about making a shift and struggling and then you know, making progress. I mean, you help all of us who you know, sometimes it's easier to stay and do something even if it's not, you know, like it's hard to change and it's hard to try new things and put yourself in that uncertain position, and you sharing that is empowering for all of us who are struggling.
Yeah. Well, it's part of the deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. We can't get good if we don't fall down. You know, there's an old saying in martial arts: you fall down 7 times, you get up 8. And you know, I kind of live by that. So, uh, and you know, and when it comes to working with the folks that we work with, if I can help them get down or get back up after they've fallen down, you know, then I feel like that's a good position for us both to be in. And, you know, because I've had people pick me up on that eighth time or help, you know. And so, you know, constantly it's this, you know, it's this thing that we're all involved in, you know, we're moving forward, and that's what we're all doing. And, you know, there's a, you know, this, for me, there's this idea, and, you know, we're all somewhere in the process. So kind of the picture that I have is that, you know, we all have this big square block of wood. You know, it's a perfectly square, big, great big block of wood, and we want to turn it into a sphere. And so what we do is we take a saw and we cut off all of the corners of that, right? So 8 corners, we cut off all the corners, and we've changed the shape, but it's far away from being a sphere. And now we have more corners. And so now we have to cut off more corners, and we change the shape again, and now we have even more corners. And every time we do it, we just keep making more and more work for ourselves. But the good news is that we get better at making cuts. And while we're changing the shape of our wooden block, and it's getting closer to the sphere, and I'm getting better at making these cuts. And that's the idea, right? And we're all on that's the journey we're on.
Yeah.
We're all somewhere in that journey. Some of us have just started making cuts, and some of us are closer to a sphere, and the ones that are making better cuts can go back and go, if you made this little adjustment here, you might be able to, and so that's kind of how I see it. And because that's what people have done for me.
Yeah.
And
Yep, that's fantastic. That's a fantastic analogy.
so, yeah.
Cool. Well, I have a sneaking suspicion that I could ask you questions all day long. But is there anything that I didn't ask you about the book that I should have asked you that you would like to visit about before I let you go?
I feel like the questions you asked were really good questions, and and I hope I answered them in a way that makes sense. And yeah, and if folks get the book, I hope they enjoy it. And like I said, it's more of a way of honoring the first book, because truly I wouldn't be anywhere close to where I am now had it not been for that first book. And it changed my life completely. Everything I have, I owe to that book, that first book. And so hopefully this book gives a little bit more background to that and honors that book a little bit. And and like I said, we're all just trying to move the needle a little bit. So hopefully it does that a little bit.
Yeah. Well, it's a great read, and it's going to be one that ends up on my bedside table to read again and again, because there's so much in there. So, well,
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time to visit today, and hopefully we'll get to visit again sometime soon.
I'm sure we will.
All right.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Mark.